welcome to Brave Bold Brilliant, James. Nice to see you.
Likewise, darling. It's been a while. Lovely to see you as always.
Oh, well, it has. And we were just chatting that you have only done, this is the third podcast interview that you have done ever.
That's right, yeah. And the second one, I said, please don't release it.
Oh, well, that's not going to happen on this one. We are releasing this. But no, I'm honoured. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. I can hardly say no.
Well, I think this is a lesson in perseverance, resilience, and me just nagging the hell out of you to get you to come on.
Yeah, and also I feel like I owe you from all of the extra hard work you did at our event in October. So.
Well, you see, always keep one in the bank just in case. So, James, now you have had a very interesting professional life, shall we say? And, everything from media to events to entrepreneurship. You name it. You've done a lot, haven't you? You've done a lot in the space.
I've had a few goes around.
You've had a few goes around. And what I'm really interested in, we're going to talk about all of the highs, the lows, the twists and turns in the journey, James. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, sometimes it feels to me that it's a little bit of a buzzword. People say, I'm an entrepreneur, But what does it really mean? What does it mean to you? Because you genuinely are an entrepreneur. So what's the perspective of entrepreneurship from your side?
It's kind of interesting. If you sort of wound back about 7-8 years ago, if you called it, entrepreneurs were either, the people that were absolutely the top of the game, like the Richard Bransons of the world, Elon Musk, you call them entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Or it was people who were like, I'm an entrepreneur / dancer / rapper / something. And it was always one of those things, which is why when I used to run an event that was similarly themed before the pandemic, I didn't use the title entrepreneurs. But I kind of like it, and I kind of wish I did. And I've got the opportunity now to call my new event Festival of Entrepreneurs. But I suppose, what does it mean? I think, an entrepreneur is someone who's prepared to take some risk, who can deal with an insane amount of uncertainty, possibly a little bit bonkers, and maybe could turn their hand to succeeding in an industry where they're, not trained or haven't had a great deal of experience. I think a lot of entrepreneurs that I meet, and, maybe sometimes put myself in there, I'd have a go at anything. I think the sort of fundamental principles behind it, you could probably apply almost anywhere.
Yeah. So have a go at anything. And I think this is really interesting because I guess one positivity around entrepreneurs, and when you spend time with people that genuinely, start, scale, have multiple businesses over the years, they do see opportunities everywhere. But then the flip side of that is, I think there can also be a danger of distraction, following the shiny penny, just kind of not seeing things fully all the way through. So how do you manage the excitement around a new initiative and a shiny penny versus actually land something, make a bloody great business out of it?
Yes, I think you've got to, when you start these projects or these businesses, you need to innovate in some way, shape or form. There's absolutely no point in doing exactly the same as what someone else has already done.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is a huge space for lifestyle businesses. If there's a barber down the high street, there's 100 barbers, right? So I couldn't imagine that I'd necessarily be able to innovate because a haircut is pretty well understood. If you're going to, work in like the film industry or the events industry, you've got to innovate, right? So you've got to be able to do something a little bit differently to what's happened before, and that's my kind of starting point. Can you do something better, cheaper, more productive than it was before? And if you can show a little bit of that, well, then you've probably got, the kernel of an idea.
How do you decide if something is a goer or not a goer then when you're looking at stuff?
So this is kind of interesting. So I've been in business since I was 23. I had a couple of years in a corporate, but largely I've, worked for myself over 4 or 5 different businesses, if you want to count ones that didn't necessarily see the light of day. And sorry, I completely lost my same fucking thought.
It's all right.
So
we're going to
cut that bit out again.
So how do you, James, decide between what's a goer when you see an opportunity and an idea versus actually going, no, it's not quite the right thing for me to pursue?
Right. So to rewind a little bit, so I've been in business since I was 23 and I'm in my middle to late 40s now. I think when I first started, I just wanted to do something that was cool. Right? I started off, working when I was super young. I got my first full-time job at 16. There's probably a reason why it didn't last more than 10 weeks, couldn't sit still. But I went into kind of publishing when I was really young, like 17, one of the biggest publishers, PLC. And I sort of worked on this really famous magazine that had like millions of readers. But my job was to sell the advertising. It was like the commercial side of it. And I think after a few years of doing that, and I did that for Marketing Week and a few other kind of publishers, was like, right, I don't want to be defined by this anymore. I want to be the one that comes up with the idea for the adverts, and I want to be the one that, kind of comes up with the creative ideas. So I just launched an ad agency, like literally just like that. I thought about it for about 4 months, and I thought, this is what I want to do more than anything else in the world. I just went and did it.
Yeah.
Like, went and did it. And I don't know if it was more luck than judgment. Now I look back, I was just in the right place at a transformation of technology that had come in, because, back in the olden days, you wanted to make press ads. It was like 4 pieces of film. You'd kind of stamp them down. It used to take a whole studio full of people ages to create this thing. And then Photoshop came out, and I could do it with a mate, and we could do it in an afternoon. Like, it was a totally different thing. And therefore, we could produce, what had been produced before at like half cost. So I think it was right place at the right time. But I just wanted to be, I didn't want to be a salesman. I wanted to be a creative.
Yeah.
Which is really ironic, because later on, you really got to be able to sell stuff, and you can just hire someone to be creative.
Yeah.
So I think, so that version of me back then just wanted to do something that was cool, and I was young, and I set up a studio on Brick Lane in Shoreditch, asymmetrical haircuts, all black outfits, which I apparently appears to be wearing again, after years of wearing a kind of suit. I just want to do something really, really cool. Now, I like to think about things. Back in those days, it was like 90% doing and 10% thinking. As I'm older and arguably a bit wiser, there's a bit more thought behind what I want to do. And I'm in the event space now, so I'm an entrepreneur. Kind of creating kind of large scale events. And my last 2, this was all about entrepreneurship. Before that was all about climate change. And I thought deeply about I could make an impact in that space, and it did. And I think so now it's can I do something, right, which is worthwhile. I'm going to do something that people might talk about amongst other people, rather than just do something that I think is really cool. Because if I wanted to do something that was really cool, I'd get involved in off-world, engineering or space travel or something,
But you are doing something that's super cool, actually, but you're doing it with a more logical, thought-through approach than probably when you were younger and you just used to shoot from the hip a little bit more, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you got to, I think things through a lot more than I used to.
Yeah.
Think things through a lot more. It's much more, see which way the wind blows you when you're young. And you can afford to do that when you're young.
Yeah.
Right? You can afford to kind of, just have a go and see what happens in 3 years. When you get a bit older, you realise there's only so many swings of the bat, right? So you've got to kind of pick what you're going to do a little bit more carefully.
Well, yeah, and actually that's linked to risk appetite, isn't it? Because you started talking about, one of the key characteristics of being an entrepreneur is that you're prepared to take risk and you're prepared to lose, whatever you might put into that, whether it's time, money, energy, etc., for the pursuit of something that may be amazing but may be a complete flop. So the appetite for risk is a key part of being an entrepreneurship. But as you get a little bit older, I guess to a certain extent, you've got more to lose because you've got commitments, you've got family, you've got all those things.
Yeah, of course.
But that still doesn't mean to say that you're not entrepreneurship with your approach, because you clearly are.
I got into it when I was really young. I spent all my 20s, all of my 30s, and a little gap where I worked for another company to learn an industry. And then I've been back at it again. So I think, I became an entrepreneur because I wanted to be. And now, if I'm being absolutely honest, I'm an entrepreneur because I bloody have to be.
Unemployable. You're not unemployable.
Well, you do this, like in my social circle, like we all look at each other like, what would we do? If we went to go, work for a corporate, we want to be the MD of something. It's like, they're not going to hire us. They want people who've been there for 20 years that are showing the loyalty to the board, and that's going to hire someone with a bunch of new ideas to come in and, disrupt everything. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting perspective. And I want to talk about sort of mindset and the approach to business and entrepreneurship, because I'm the opposite to you, James. I spent the majority of my career in the corporate world as a CEO of listed businesses. Yeah. So I was very comfortable in that space. Do you know what I mean? I knew I was good in the boardroom. I was nearly always the only bloody woman in the boardroom with a P&L. That's another story. But nonetheless, I knew I could kind of operate in that environment quite well. I could deal with the politics. I could deal with, the strategy and all the governance and all that kerfuffle that you have in corporate life. But I used to tell myself, before I made the decision to kind of jump out of corporate and set up our own business, I used to tell myself, I'm a great corporate CEO, but I'm not an entrepreneur. And I used to tell this story to myself internally. And of course, it's absolute bullshit, right? Because when you actually do jump out of that world, which not that many people do, but when people do, you realize that actually, you have got a lot more knowledge and experience that you can apply in the entrepreneurial world. And it took me years actually to shift my mindset to say, no, actually, you can do this. You're not that bad, actually. You're pretty good at it. But what about the mindset of entrepreneurship?
This is it. I think once you kind of accept that you don't get like a letter through the post that suddenly says, congratulations, you're now an entrepreneur. Go and crack on.
Damn it.
I suppose you've got to convince yourself, right?
Yes.
You've got to convince yourself. And I think the way that you convince yourself is getting results. There's a million people with a million ideas, and there are fewer people that actually kind of put those ideas into practice, and even fewer that get traction with it, and even fewer that stick with it and kind of build it on. So it's almost like it's a filtering. Everybody has the capability to write one novel, they say, right? Everyone has the ability to go into business if they want to.
Yeah.
And I think, once you've accepted that when you're doing it, you are it. And I think one of the scary things about being an entrepreneur is you are literally it. There's no safety net. It's like tiptoeing across the thing, and there's nothing but tigers and sharks underneath ready to get you if you fall in. So you're going to have the gumption for it. Then I suppose that to your point as well, there's a bit about external recognition.
Yes.
I think once you've done it a few times, that's how people kind of refer to you. So I suppose, how do you go from that initial jump? How did you convince yourself that, right, it's time to kind of leave the relative comfort? Although it is complicated, I imagine. Being a high flyer in the corporate world. How do you kind of, then give all that up and, go and take a walk down this other path?
And it is, I think for me, the big difference is around, like you say, there's a lot of pressure and stress in corporate, but there's equally the same level of, a similar level of pressure and stress. But the difference is that I find is there is no steady paycheck at the end of every month, right? And even though if you're doing a big job in corporate, even if you're just doing whatever job you're doing, you're going to get paid at the end of the month, and that gives you certainty, right? Whereas when you jump into this world of being a business owner, business operator, some months you might not be getting paid. You might not have anything. You might actually be struggling with cash flow to make sure the team is paid, and that's the difference.
And you know what? There's the incredibly different pressures. You're quite but they're not. They're not. One's not more pressure than the other. There's a completely different type of pressure. I don't think there's many people that go into striking out on their own. You're gonna have months where it's can of baked beans, right? You've got to make those sacrifices. We've all made those sacrifices. Equally, we've had the spoonful of caviar at the other end as well. And then months later, it's back to the baked beans, and you get that sort of. It's almost like a feast or famine kind of life when you start out. There's no steady state. So I think if you're gonna give up that comfort of corporate life, which you probably fought really bloody hard to get to the top table on, it's got to be worth it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also when you're investing your own money, it feels different as well. If you're building a website or whatever you're doing, you're doing some product development stuff or you're hiring people, it feels different than when you're in a larger organization. So even though I had big budgets, I had thousands of people on my team, so I was very careful and very considered with the company money, but it was still the company money. And it just psychologically to me, it just feels different, rightly or wrongly.
Maybe, but another way of thinking about this, when you're in a corporate, there's loads of guardrails. Right? You can't just, I like the look of that person, I'm going to hire them. Right? When you've got your own business, you actually can.
Yes.
And Christ, we've all made some pretty hairy hires with that mentality. We just trusted our judgment off the bat, and then months later we've kind of paying the price. I think there's probably something to be said for not completely ignoring a little bit of structure in what you're doing. And there's that kind of expression around, kind of hire slowly and fire quickly. Whereas the reality is when you're in your small business, you're in your bunker, you're using your own money to hire people, quite often you'll end up, hiring the first person that comes through the door that half fits the picture, right? Because you're on a timer. If you don't get your sales team in by the end of the month, you're going to miss your opportunity. So you'll end up making the types of mistakes. You might end up making the types of mistakes you simply wouldn't make in a corporate. So you can't dismiss that. There's some of that is not a bad thing.
No, it's not, and it's just different. It is just different. I'm going to slightly adjust your scarf, James, if you don't mind.
Keep me nice and warm.
Getting up close and personal with Mr. James Ashwood. Sorry, Mrs. Ashwood, not too close and personal. But no, so I think the next question I wanted to ask you was, where did this entrepreneurial element to your personality come from? What was it early influences in terms of family, or was it a particular
it really
event?
was. I thought you might ask me this, and I was kind of trying to rewind to think when that was really prevalent. And I think it goes back to when I was 16. So I got offered a job straight out of school, for a big insurance company, and I took an aptitude test and scored incredibly highly on it, and they said, you can have a job. So I'm like, okay, do I get paid for this? And they're like, yeah, you get £500 a month. And I'm thinking, well, £500 versus the £20 pocket money I'm getting a month is a huge leap up. But of course, they kind of take you on board, and there's not really much of an onboarding. You had a sort of couple of chats, and then it's right, go and make that stack of paper disappear into this stack of paper by the back end of the day. Anyway, obviously, I was too young at that point, so I couldn't sit still. So they sort of send me over to the careers advisor guy, and he sits me down. He's an older fellow, and he said, James, I want to talk to you about your future and how you see things. Now tell me, what do you want to do in your life? And I turned around and said, I want to be an FBI agent. Well, I was 16, I was watching the X-Files at the time, and he sort of looked at me and was like, well, you're not American for a start, so that's probably not going to work. But anyway, I think he could probably understand that I wasn't going to last very long in that place. But he gave me a really kind of important piece of advice. He said, there's two ways to make it in life, right? You've either got to work your way through the corporate ladder, and you've got to become someone important in a big company, or you strike out on your own and you do it on your own. And if I look back, that was probably one of those like forks in the road where I took it really seriously. So I did my, what looked like, another 7 years, working in the media industry. And I was like, right, that's it. I'm going to strike out on my own. And I think that piece of information that's just ringing in the ear, you can shortcut the journey to the top by doing it yourself.
Yeah. So real like a sliding doors moment there to kind of go, oh, hang on, light bulb's gone off.
I think so. That's the direction. I got somebody fired, shortly after that meeting, and a guy called me up when I was at home and he's like, wish you the very best with your life, and don't blame him especially for this career path that I've chosen or life path that I've chosen, but it definitely rang true.
Yeah. Well, actually, when things like that happen, in the moment can feel pretty rubbish. But actually, when you look back, you go, probably the best thing that ever happened to you, because it then gave you that catalyst along with that advice.
And it kind of does. And I think, I think, growing up, I just had this idea that, if I just do it, then it will be done, right? And I don't know if there's such a thing in luck in life, but I think if you try things, you're likely to be more lucky, right?
Yeah.
I look back now, and I've got children now, and the world has completely changed. The world has completely changed. I think I had the right attitude at the right time, and, just had this thing ringing through my ear, if you want to be successful, be a corporate titan, or do it yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what about you? What about growing up? What was the early family life like for you?
So yeah, it's not anything like what people might imagine. I had a particularly challenging childhood, as lots of people who have gone down this path has. I was talking to Richard Harpin at the event in October, and he invests in entrepreneurs, and one of the bullet points is people who have overcome early childhood trauma. We've all gone through that. We go into too much detail, but it was a long way from the very comfortable silver spoon existence that most people think I had.
Well, yeah, and this is a really interesting point, James, actually, because people see you now, right? And you're very polished, you're very articulate, you've got this amazing professional life that you've had in the world of business and entrepreneurship. And they go, oh, it's all right. It's all right for you, isn't it? It's all right for you, James. Look at James swanning around. His life's perfect, right? But it's not, is it? And what goes on behind the scenes and some of the trials, the tribulations, the upset, the hurt that we have to get over. Actually, people don't see that stuff, do they?
They used to be. You used to get points for closing the gap. You used to get points for, stiff upper lip and, getting on with stuff.
Yes.
Interestingly, I feel like I've gone my entire life doing that, and now that's no longer fashionable.
Yeah.
And now it's much more fashionable to be the victim of something, right?
Yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because early life because obviously, without going into any detail, I guess we all have a choice, don't we? We have a choice, and I had a great childhood, so I certainly come from a very lucky position of not a lot of money, but very working class family, but very very kind of loving family. But I think when things happen in our life, we have a choice as to do we carry that around as something that's going to anchor us and drag us down and be a chip on our shoulder, or do we actually go, well, no, I'm going to use it as fuel to take a different path and use it in a positive way, see it, a lighter side out of what might be quite a dark situation for some people.
I think if I take the good from that, it taught me to take responsibility. And this is a bloody important trait if you're going to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I had to take a lot of responsibility very early.
Yeah, so you had to grow up pretty fast by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I really did. And I missed out on, going to university. I missed out on traveling. I missed out on a lot of other stuff. But I spent those years, kind of understanding the industry I was in. I was able to launch my first business at 23.
Which is incredible.
Which is cool.
Absolutely. And now you've got a beautiful family of your own.
Absolutely. And very different James to the one of 20 years ago.
Yeah. I'm so jealous you're only in your mid-40s. I can only...
I think before the pandemic, I still look a lot younger.
You and me both, love. Oh, fantastic. So I want to talk about Festival of Entrepreneurs, because this is where we met.
We did.
And it was the inaugural event last October.
Yes.
At the NEC. 5,000 attended. How many?
That would be this time round. I think we tossed up. It was just over 2,500 over the 2 days. It felt like more.
Yeah.
Because the energy in the place was absolutely insane.
It really was, but there was a huge amount of registered interest as well, because there's people that turn up on the day, but then there's actually the wider community,
and that kind of,
as well.
that's something that happens with all events, right? So the amount of people that, broadly speaking, however many people sign up, half the people find their way to the event for one reason. It doesn't matter what industry you're in.
I know I got my 5,000 from somewhere.
Exactly. But phenomenal interest. For the launch event.
So describe what it is. Describe who it serves and why Festival of Entrepreneurs is so important, and people need to get on it this year, people. Let me tell you, 100% do not miss out, because you will be absolutely regretting that, and you don't want a life of any regrets. So, Festival of Entrepreneurs.
So there's a couple of ways of looking at this.
Yeah.
I suppose, when I went into business as that mid-20s kid, I had all of the right drive. I just didn't have the full suite of knowledge. Right? I didn't really understand financial literacy. I didn't really understand how you raise capital. Didn't really understand how you build a team out. Didn't really understand how you build a brand out, if I'm being honest. Just kind of just racing to get sales and kind of make the thing a success. And I think what I wanted to do with Festival Entrepreneurs is kind of create a sort of 2-day part in everyone's calendar, right, where people come together, right, to sort of share knowledge, right, to make connections. Do you think you spend all year as an entrepreneur, you're going around, you meet people, you're going to this, you're trying to build your contacts out, right? People you might be able to do business with. It's an information game, so we're always trying to kind of keep on top of whatever the latest information is. And I want to create a sort of 2 days in the year where you come here and it's like that on steroids, right? You can make 100 connections. You can hear from people who have trodden the path. You can increase your technical knowledge. And be at home with other entrepreneurs, right, that are going through the same kind of challenges. It's really difficult if you've got friends who are civil servants, for example. You can have absolutely zero in common.
Yeah.
Absolutely zero, because completely worlds away. Not to say that one is more important than the other, but completely worlds away. So it's sort of set out to do that. So and there's no substitute from learning from people who've trodden that path before. And the one regret I have in my earlier days, I should have read more. I should have read more. And maybe that was young and didn't have the education for it. But I kind of just assumed I'd just figure everything out. It's like kind of I had a stint in the film industry. You kind of meet these new kind of independent filmmakers, and their work doesn't fit in any genre. Everything fits in a genre, right? There is nothing that's happened before that's going to happen to you that hasn't happened before.
Yeah.
Right. So we thought we'd kind of get some really kind of heavyweight entrepreneurs together who'd share that story. We had founders from Lush Cosmetics and Ted Baker and Grenade Bars, and they're amazing. They're telling a story. That's Richard Harford again from HomeServe. And the interesting thing is everyone was always 5 minutes away from it all going probably wrong. But they found they found the extra gear, they found a way through, and they are the people that I tip my hat to because they've done it. You will learn more listening to them for half an hour than you will reading, books from people who talk about it but haven't done it. Right. So that's really quite important. We also wanted to, so as well as the kind of grandees, we also wanted to get together some really cool founders from brands that you might see around your house. We had Siri toothbrush and Absolute Collagen. It was really cool, kind of hearing how people are doing it today. That was really good. And then going back to what I was kind of alluding to earlier about kind of having a really rounded set of knowledge around all the key pillars for growing a business. And it doesn't matter if you're in baby care or biotech, right? You need financial literacy. Right? You need to understand capital. £1 from that person is not the same as £1 from that person. You need to understand the different types of capital, when to look to raise them, how to raise them. So we were really in depth for that over 2 days. We looked at every possible avenue to capital, panel after panel, full with absolute experts. They're really cool. There was another really kind of interesting sort of segment around technology and marketing, and specifically how that intersects with AI. And we will no doubt touch on this later because everyone wants to talk about AI. But that's fascinating. I think we were able to kind of present that content through the lens of the entrepreneur. Like, I don't necessarily need to know how the developers are doing X, Y, and Z, but I want to know if I'm investing here, what's the result going to look like? So we sort of gave us the opportunity to do that. And then we ran a fourth stage, which we're going to rebrand this year to like kind of people, leadership, and culture. You know what it takes to really build a really good team, right? Because this now, as you get further on, you're the the shining light to begin with, but unless you put a team around you, you're not going to go anywhere. And then also being able to focus on that kind of leadership piece as well, and resilience. It could be a long, difficult journey if you're not well supported as an entrepreneur.
100%. Yeah.
I think so. In some of those sessions, we around kind of mindset that we put in there, I really enjoyed them. Because it kind of, sort of, yes, I'm going through that as well. So that was really cool. So anyway, so the event, we got to kind of, got to hear from 150 amazing speakers, and it was really cool. Be 200 this time round, maybe more, maybe more. And I want to keep kind of, thinking about researching, hearing people's opinions on, the right type of strategies, tactics, and executions, right, to move a business forward.
I mean, it was an incredible event, and I'm not just saying that because you're sitting in front of me. Genuinely, it was, and it was the first. Obviously, it was the first one anyway, but it was the first event like that I've attended. Whether even across all the years of going to different, Focusrite and going to all the travel, sort of events and stuff. But it's the first one that I've been to with that real, genuine focus on entrepreneurship. So it was a huge success. So much work and effort involved in it. And like you say, you had some incredible speakers, really amazing speakers.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I mean, people were prepared to share, really kind of share. And then not only that, prepared to kind of stay around afterwards and meet everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, I interviewed Jeannette Barrett on stage, who was a co-founder of Grenade. And I'd interviewed Jeannette before. So and then we re-released that interview on Brave, Bold, Brilliant as well. So, that which is fantastic, because then we share her stories even wider. And then, of course, Maxine Laceby, Absolute Collagen, Piers Linney. Again, all of these people have actually been on my podcast as a result of either the connection that I made at the Festival of Entrepreneurs or, a prior connection via someone. So this human to human relationship, especially I think in a world of AI and tech, is even more important, I believe, not less important.
I'm finding my clock being wound up now because we're starting to talk about the impacts of AI. No, absolutely. There's nothing beats meeting people in the flesh. Nothing beats listening to them firsthand. The second best is recorded media. And as we're about to talk about, no doubt, a distant third place now is written media.
Yeah.
Which has absolutely been disrupted, and not necessarily for the better by AI. But sort of meeting people, and that's the really nice thing. We've had loads of thank you emails and testimonials, and people made connections, but they got themselves to the event. Whether they're attending as a delegate, whether they're exhibiting, whether they were presenting or as a speaker, people got there and they made the best of it.
Yeah.
But that's just typical though of entrepreneurs, right? People just, it's a level of enthusiasm and sharing, which is I've never seen in any other industry.
No, exactly. So the dates for this year, for 2026, what are the dates and where's the location?
So we're 3rd and 4th of November.
3rd and 4th of November, people. Remember? Yes.
Back at the NEC again.
Yes, great.
More space, more everything, really building on what we put together. People will double the attendance.
Yep.
We'll kind of, keep the core content and the opportunities there, but also create more structured ways that people can meet each other.
Yeah.
More kind of mini events within the event and kind of cool stuff.
Yeah. So it's going to be another second year, but actually even bigger and better than last year from where you started.
Yeah. And I think, and like all second year events, when you launch an event, as we did, you sort of start 10 months out, you've got absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
You've got an idea, you've got maybe an AI image on the front of a media pack, and you've got a floor plan, and off you go, and you're promising people that you're going to deliver something amazing.
Yeah.
And I was really well supported. I got the pleasure this time of putting together a team that involves Sir Liam Fox as the chairman of the event, and his just an amazing person, full stop. But his knowledge and contacts around businesses, second to none. It's unbelievable. He's one of the smartest people I've had the opportunity to spend time with. Alex Chisnell.
Yes.
He's a really close friend. We worked together before the pandemic. We sat down and we tried to run so many virtual events and that during the pandemic. We kind of kept in touch. It's really cool to work with Alex. He's really well liked. Just a super person.
He is.
And the rest of the team too. So it was a good event, loads of bloody hard work, and it was really nice that the feedback we got from people who participated found value in it.
Yeah, hugely.
Because I think, if you're going to take a day or two out of the office as an owner driver of a business with some traction, well, you've got to be convinced you're going to get some return on investment.
Yeah.
And I think, some of the best feedback I got was sort of take my badge off and just wandering around chatting to some of the visitors who don't know who I am.
Yeah.
I was chatting to one guy running, business selling over 10 million, and he said it was really interesting hearing people from other industry sectors. How he's it's an engineering company, but he was talking about how it's interesting to look at kind of staff retention and building brand for your consumer-facing brand, or a fintech brand.
Yeah,
it's really interesting, I think, to see different perspectives on the same challenges.
Yeah, and actually, it was Alex Chisnell how I found my way to you.
Exactly.
And I met Alex during the crazy clubhouse days during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then all these years later, well, quite a few years later, still in touch. And then, of course, we've got podcasting in common. So my advice to anyone, if you're in a job, if you're in the corporate world, if you're an entrepreneur, whatever you do, you're solopreneur, get yourself out there, get networking, and do not take those human relationships for granted. They need to be nurtured, loved, and you never know who's in the room. You never know. And it could be the guy with the scruffy trainers and the battered bloody jeans that is the decamillionaire or the billionaire that could have an interesting impact on your life, right?
And just be nice to everyone.
And be
right?
curious.
It's being nice, be interesting. There's a million people out there. And I wish I'd taken some of this advice on it early in my career.
Yeah.
So I was like Kaiser Soze from Usual Suspect. I'll just disappear. And I think I'll just rebuild my contacts. I did that in a few different incarnations. When you get a bit older, you realise those connections and those contacts, you might not require anything for each other for 5 years, but all of a sudden you might suddenly find yourself in a place where you do.
Yeah.
And you've either kept in touch or you certainly haven't done anything not to keep in touch.
Yeah.
And it's really important, I think in more and more, especially in the age of AI, those personal contacts, absolutely indispensable.
Yeah, and I always think lead with value first. There's nothing worse than when, you've not heard from someone for years and years and years, they've not bothered, all of a sudden they want bloody something, right? They maybe been fired or something, and they're like, give us a job. And okay, there's a place for that, I get it. But actually, a much more meaningful way is just give first. Right.
Of course, you've got to play these things
give first, but we all help each other out, don't we? And I think it's much more of a real relationship when you do take the time and effort.
You do. I mean, advice, connecting people, this is just your opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Right. And in the grand scheme of things, that can be worth considerably more down the line when these things come back to you.
Yeah.
But also some people are just naturally good at it, just being a good egg and sharing. Some people are just not particularly good at it.
Sure.
It's a skill you can definitely work on.
Yeah.
But I think, just people always remember difficult people. It's only difficult, but people always remember those that were enthusiastic, that were just, just excited about what they're doing. And I think, keep that.
Yeah. And someone said to me, I can't remember who it was now, but I think it really landed with me. It said, people might not always remember exactly what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Yeah, I guess. Do
you know what I mean? Whether it's energized or, kind of quite emotional, whatever. But, that human to human for me is so important. I think it's
I think it's absolutely indispensable. It's the reason I've gone, it's the reason I went back into another event business a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Because I think, I've made some pretty bold predictions about what's going to happen in the age of AI. To myself, I don't post on Twitter or anything like that. But, I think we're now starting with the thin end of the wedge for how large language models and AI is going to change the fundamental nature of communication and human to human contact, conversations. What used to be taken for granted is suddenly going to be a massive premium.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like basic human skills are now becoming sort of almost like
Well, they are, because sort of technical skills. You go to university, you can study the vocational things, law, accountancy, medicine. A lot of that, you can do it faster, quicker, cheaper. With AI stuff, we're only just scratching the surface of it. But kind of how, like you say, how you make people feel after you've met them. Are you creative? Are you have you got good social standing? All these kind of things. These are really important skills, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And AI, I mean, obviously mentioned AI, so we're going to talk about AI a little bit, haven't we? And that it can really power a business to go very, very fast. It's breaking down barriers in lots of ways. There's lots of really positive things about AI, I believe, in all sectors and all business. but there's also a lot of fear around AI. So how do you see AI, the positives and maybe more of the challenges, if you like, in the world of entrepreneurship?
So I'm just about old enough that I can remember, the dawn of the internet age around sort of 96, 97, and people thought it might change the world a little bit. Absolutely bloody changed everything.
Yeah.
It really did. And we're sort of sitting at what I imagine to be, a similar phase with the development of AI. And I think, a year and a half ago, I made some pretty bold predictions, which I'll share with you in a second. And I think I'm right on those, but probably not right on the timing.
Yeah.
And I think so. Going back, a year and a half ago, agentic AI was about to hit it. You're suddenly going to be able to scale a business up. You're not going to need any staff. Your marketing campaign, pick your data, make your creative, send your stuff out. Like none of that's happened, or at least none of it's happened in a reliable enough way that you and I can go and take a subscription to a platform and trust it.
Yeah.
Right. We're miles away from that. Right. But I think it's almost, what do they call it? A K shape, isn't it? When you kind of go like this. I think on one hand, the potential for AI, and I suppose an interesting kind of recent story is the whole kind of Anthropic battle with the US Department of Defense. I think there's a lot of people that have suddenly got their eyes open. It's like, well, if Anthropic are pulling out of, their contracts with the US military, that's not going to please their shareholders, but that tells me that I don't think the US Department of Defense are necessarily interested in saving money, right? What they're interested in is optimization.
Yeah.
And I think what that's hinting at to me is, the fundamental potentials of AI to make those kind of, real world decisions just better than humans. Otherwise, it wouldn't even been a topic of conversation. I've got a friend who's setting up an AI association, which is around kind of, sort of how AI can do good in science, and therefore how we can, cure the world of all of its ills. And that, I think, they're two completely different things. But these, to me, are the positive impact that AI can have as soon as we work out a way of providing enough energy for it to scale up and the other. And I think that the other side of that kind of K shape is the sheer disappointment these days when I kind of, I'll go on to LinkedIn, and it's the first 10 posts. It's like, this has just been written by AI, and it's like the uncanny valley, isn't it? In like robotics, when things are human enough, but just not, it really kind of turns you off. And I think now I sort of grade people on, well, your prompting's better than the last prompt I read. But there's a little part of my heart that sinks when I see someone who's kind of, sort of lifted an entire piece of surface output from ChatGPT and just reproduced it on LinkedIn. But then even, really seasoned professionals, I use it as well. I use it to edit. I use it to sharpen things up.
Of course.
But even lots of writers that I follow that haven't got anything to do with entrepreneurship, I'm starting to see it creep in. And like humans are really good at like recognizing patterns. And, a year ago, you might have noticed that words like foster suddenly became everywhere. We're fostering this environment. We're fostering this community. Like no one really wrote that. Now we're quietly doing things. And you just see that kind of creeping in, And I think, so where's it all leading to? And I think going back to the analogy at the beginning of the internet age, like there was a million different interfaces for websites when you navigated them. Like there was no standardization. Google come in and all of a sudden, if you want to be ranked, right, you need to standardize the way that you present your website. And what it did over time was it pulled everybody to kind of produce their websites in a certain way. Because if you didn't, you're not going to get ranked. And if you start coming up with fancy interfaces, users are just like, not bothered, not going to invest the time. This is without question going to happen with the written word. We're going to get to the point now where all we're really doing is just aligning ourselves or our company with a prompt and an output from ChatGPT. Right. So what does that lead to? So what it leads to is, first of all, quite rightly, people can't be bothered to read what people can't be bothered to write. But secondly, and probably more concerningly, is going to be a breakdown in trust, right, of the written word at the very least. With the written word, press releases, articles, all this sort of stuff back in my early days of working in print. That was what differentiated the really professional from from the less professional. But now it's to a penny. Right? So what's going to replace that? Stuff like this, video communication. I suspect, the announcements of the future are sort of 15, 20-second videos. You start to see that a lot on LinkedIn now, people with kind of cameras pointing and stuff. That'll get professionalized, and people will think it through a bit more. They'll grade it, the colors, and record the sound differently. And then most importantly for me is that desire to get back and actually kind of meet people in the flesh. Is a pun.
Well, and it's a good perspective because there's always two sides to the coin, isn't there? We were talking earlier around, when you have a difficult situation, there's two ways of looking at it, isn't there? Glass is half full, glass is half empty. And I think you're absolutely right. There's the two aspects, your K, as you well described there. And when it comes to starting a business versus scaling a business versus possibly maturity and maybe exit, where do you think AI plays the biggest role in that sort of life cycle of a business? And then I'm going to ask you a secondary question, which is just in general, what do you think is hardest, starting, scaling or exiting? Having done a few of these over the years, James. But yeah, where does AI play the most positive role, do you think?
So what's AI? So if you're in a startup, many people are, well, it's really, really good for doing the type of desk research that you might spend 4 or 6 weeks doing. Right?
Yeah.
You can set it on some deep thinking, give it a few tasks, and get stuff done in a couple of hours. When that was originally first possible, the hard thing was accepting how quickly you get that, and then you still got to process the information yourself, right? So getting kind of research, but also you got to treat the outputs of AI like the early days of Wikipedia. Like, don't believe everything that's down there. Ultimately it's a business. It has to deliver an answer. That answer is not always the correct answer.
Sure.
But I think for kind of, for sort of entry level research and stuff like this, absolutely unbeatable. You don't need to necessarily hire the consultants or the specialists you do, because you can find this information.
Yeah.
But that's really good for them. It's actually really quite good. If you think of, I suppose, like the training models that they're taught on, it's read every book that's been published. It knows all sorts of structure. You can get it to, want to go to market strategy. It'll give you the bits, right? It won't always be perfect. So I think for kind of, making kind of outline frames to stuff, it's absolutely brilliant. You can come up with a not particularly brilliant, but not rubbish marketing campaign off the back of it, probably enough to get you, through the doors.
Yeah.
So what it can do is it can save a shed load of time, save a shed load of time, and to that level of expense. I think as you start going up the ladders a little bit, its potential to work with different data sources, and kind of, I mean, that's probably the next big thing that's likely to be adopted. Exiting, I don't know. I haven't thought it through.
We'll talk about that later then. But yeah, so I think particularly powerful. It breaks down the barriers to entry for starting a business in lots of ways where cost may have been prohibitive.
It does, and maybe I'm just talking from my own experience. I think you've got to. In my experience, the best thing I found with ChatGPT, I've got different chats for different things.
Yeah.
Like, it's supposed to remember stuff, but it doesn't really. It sort of go back to square one half the time. So I've got different sort of chats where I'm quite in depth, and the outputs that I get, I've given lots of sort of parameters around. Like, I want the language to be this, I want it to be framed like this, that. So what I'm getting out of it is kind of feels a little bit more like what I might produce myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what it will do is it will sometimes throw up, little ideas that I didn't think of that I want to kind of investigate. So, yeah.
Yeah. So just in general then, so I think that's hugely helpful. From your perspective, have you sold any of your businesses, James?
No, I got absolutely spanked twice. Spanked twice on two that were absolutely in the position, and probably the most disappointing one was the pandemic, right?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so that may be a part of your journey that's yet to come, right, in the future.
Definitely. I mean, years ago you hear that sort of American phrase of fail better. It's like, obviously succeed first time round.
Yeah.
I've done all right out of what I've done, but have I had a 10-20 million pound exit? No. That'll come in the next wave.
Well, I have no doubt that will come in the next wave. I'll be there for the party, James.
I think so.
And clinking some nice glasses with some bubbles in it. But starting and scaling, you have done, right? You have done both.
Yeah, I've started lots of businesses, and some of those have grown, pretty well. And I just seem to have this kind of knack of finding a piece of global catastrophe just at the point when something's going well. I've sort of found. I mean, and there's some lessons to be learned in here as well. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Have a plan B if black swan events do happen. But I got really quite close to something interesting happening before the 2008 global financial crisis.
Yeah.
No one who was investing in a project we could do actually get money out of hedge funds to put any money in. So that sort of whistled down to a slow death. But the most disappointing, without question, was the thousands of days and everything, that all the investment I put into the business I had before the pandemic. And then government policy was to make events effectively illegal for 2 years.
Yeah.
And that was a hard learning curve.
Yeah. I'm gonna adjust your scarf again.
Sorry,
See, it's all. There you go. Look, going cockeye.
I think, I suppose, where I do have probably a little bit more experience than the average person is, I have started a lot of businesses, right? So I've gone from So from that idea to, idea in your head, first sketch on paper to actually seeing paid customers, and I think if I was focusing on the bit that I really enjoy, it's that part. It's that building, that initial from idea to it actually being a going concern.
Yes.
I love that part.
Yeah. So that's what really kind of gets you.
Yeah, because it's really bloody hard. That's the really hard part.
Yeah.
When you launch a business, you've got nothing apart from your credentials and your ideas.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to, sell your vision, and people have to buy it.
Well, I think it's like that World's Strongest Man. I'm showing my age now. I don't know if you ever saw the World's Strongest Man. It was a program on TV, and you used to have to pull these big, strong guys. You used to have to try and pull this bloody truck. Don't you see it? And like it's moving, and then it moves like a tiny little inch, and then before you know it, they're kind of pulling this big truck, behind them. And I think that's what it's like starting a business. It's like, God, so much effort, you're not getting anywhere, and then once you start to get that momentum,
you're absolutely right. You spend so much, sort of bobbing along, and then it takes off.
Yeah.
But at the point it's taken off, you put so much bloody work in. You're already in your head. You're always miles down the line.
Yes.
And then it's starting to get some kind of traction, and that early, and then sort of keeping that flame burning, right? So that it becomes, a business where you can, replace yourself, build a team in, grow it out. Is exactly what I've really created the Festival of Entrepreneurs for, right? To kind of come up with, to sort of discuss strategies and tactics for doing exactly that.
Yeah.
There's no one way to grow a business. There's lots of things that, people will universally say, don't do this, do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what makes it such a fascinating landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think there's three things, around business: leading yourself, leading your teams, and leading the business. The strategy, the plan, or the offering, etc. And it's always the intersection of those three that really makes the difference. And that's why when we created Rise Academy, it was very much focused on those three elements, right? And we bring it into every program that we do with teams and businesses, etc. But in particular for entrepreneurs, because it can be a really lonely place. You do have to build a team and let go, because otherwise you become the blocker for the growth. And you do actually have to have a bit of a plan as well. So when we created Rise Academy, because we launched, we went live with Rise Academy, and on the day we were at the Festival of Entrepreneurs.
There we are. All good things happening at that event, right?
Well, wasn't it bonkers? And then we had so many people coming and saying, "Oh, this is really interesting," and Celine Fox. Again, lots of interest there. But leadership, and I want to loop back around. There is a reason why I've mentioned this. You said that when pandemic happened and you had your events business, and then it just kind of you took a kick in. A huge kick in.
I think apocalyptic would be a fair.
Apocalyptic. So can you just? I don't want to kind of put you into counselling or anything or therapy. But can you just share a little bit around kind of how that felt, what was going on, how you managed to come back from it mentally?
Yeah, it's a concatenation of circumstance, which has arrived at possibly the worst moment.
Yeah.
Pandemic had been 6 months before or 6 months after. For me, it would have been a completely different thing. But I kind of built an event business up. Like a dozen people working on it, which was really cool. Established an event for 3 years at the NEC. Just about to do deals with a couple of venues in London to kind of build it out. And it was really good. I've taken plenty of external investment, invested myself, done what all entrepreneurs do and sell your property to fund it and all that kind of crazy risk-taking stuff.
Yeah.
But, I did so to back my own ability, and I knew I was on the right track, and the reason the Festival of Entrepreneurs worked first time around, I've already spent 1,000 days thinking about this. I've learned quite a few lessons from earlier incarnations. And I think, it was, and I remember it so vividly. We come off site in November, and it's like everyone loved it. It was brilliant, slightly bigger than what you saw before. Amazing sponsors, sort of AAA global brands behind it. And it was really cool. And then you sort of sort of got to around Christmas time, and then sort of started getting murmurs of, there might be something happening. And, I started realizing that quite a few of my big sponsors with offices out in the Far East, they're not committing to anything. And I'm like, ew. But at the same time, you just can't believe it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, so it sort of built up gradually and then really suddenly, and then all of a sudden, suddenly we're in lockdown and, no one knows what's going on.
Yeah.
But, I think, what we were doing, which I'm sure lots of other businesses, we were like, yeah, this will be lifted in 8 weeks. So you kind of keeping a full roster of staff on, furlough's not touching the sides.
Yeah.
You're bleeding cash, right? You're burning, but you've got this kind of weird position where right, I can't scale back because I'm dead in the water. If restrictions get lifted and we're out there, we've got no firepower, we're dead in the water.
Yeah.
And you're sort of going, and then you kind of stop, start, and then eventually you realise that this thing is just not starting again. But in the meantime, everything is just kind of gone right down. And I mean, I'm not the only one that went through it, but I think, I definitely had a disproportionate amount of downside off the back of that.
Yeah.
And there's no magic hand of the government that comes in and helps you. It's just like, good luck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So at that point, I've got to be honest, I was in a pretty dark place.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the best bits of advice you can possibly give entrepreneurs that are going through that is, stay away from the drinks cabinet, right? Unfortunately, that didn't apply for me. I'm still 5 kilos heavier than I used to be. Because what else do? You just can't believe this is happening.
No, yeah.
But I did pick myself up. I was on the brink of going under, and I had support from some close friends, and I had an idea, for a climate change event, which Celine Fox ended up being chairman of that as well. So I did pick myself up, and I did go back out to battle again, and sort of mixed results with that one. But the contacts that I made and the experience that I had through launching that has given me the confidence now to know that if I'm going to launch new events, I actually do understand the process of pretty granularly now, and I can apply that to to almost any area. So I suppose what's it cost me? It's cost me 6 years. It's cost me 6 years. Sort of shattered dreams. I had to move out of my lovely place that I was living in London and kind of start again. And and you think I sort of look back now, and we're all having sort of second guessing. Did we probably go a little bit too hard on the restrictions? Well, obviously we bloody did.
Yeah.
In my opinion, because I just
Yes.
was absolutely devastated. So I'm going to be biased.
Of course.
But I think that was but that's a lesson there, and that lesson is to hold something in reserve, right? Don't put all your chips on red, even statistically it's likely to come up, because something will happen. I mean, we're now, as soon as the pandemic kind of lifted, we go straight into the Ukraine crisis. Now, hopefully that's on its way out. We're going to another Middle Eastern crisis. There's always something. Right? There's always something that's going to disrupt. So have a plan B.
Yeah. But, and it sounds like the climate change business in between was almost like the bridge from where you were to kind of with Festival of Entrepreneurs as well,
You sort of, you end up, you put all this kind of sacrifice in, because you're not getting paid for bloody ages.
No, of
put
course,
these things together. You come up with these ideas. You have this like one lovely little moment when you're just sort of almost wrapping up the second daisies event. And you're like, okay, that was a pretty cool experience, right?
Yeah.
There were thousands of people there, and it was really, really quite good. I had that same experience the day after Festival of Entrepreneurs, which is it kind of makes all of the very late nights and the weekends that you give up to make it happen kind of worth it. So there's some, there's always some bright spots. But going back to what you were saying earlier, glass half full, glass half empty. I was reading some articles from Charlie Munger, who was Berkshire Hathaway guy's partner, really old. He was saying like the worst thing in the world is self-pity.
Yeah.
Right. And if he hears someone that comes up with a heartbreaking story, he will say to them, that is one of the most tragic stories I've ever heard. I'm really sorry to hear your news. Once you get that in your head, you realise that people will sympathise with you, really care. You're not going to build anything off the back of wallowing in it. So you somehow got to pick yourself up. And then as you're going through the loop again, you're kind of trying to dust off the disappointment. This is just life, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
And I think you've got to, and it's hard to be, thick-skinned all the time, but you do need it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you overthink these things that set you back years, well, then you never get back on the horse again, would you?
No, exactly. And all credit to you. I mean, you now with Festival of Entrepreneurs, there's so much positivity around it. Second year coming up, it's going to be bigger and better than ever. And this is just the start, right?
Absolutely. We've got aspirations to build it into a real kind of pillar of the kind of UK event scene. But also, it's just really nice. The visitors are entrepreneurs. A lot of the exhibitors are entrepreneurs. Speakers are entrepreneurs. Every conversation I'm having hundreds a month. They're the most interesting conversations, right? So to that end, I'm sort of and also learning.
Yeah.
I sort of go through these sort of pre-calls with speakers and that, and I'm really interested in what they're going to be talking about, right? Because I'm learning myself.
Yeah.
And I think that keep learning, keep being curious, all that kind of stuff. Getting to do, and it's a nice space to be in.
Yeah, no, and I am really excited, and huge congratulations, and for coming back and recovering post pandemic and coming into this space that you're in now. takes balls to do that, but like you say, it's a choice, isn't it?
And yet everyone that I speak to that's ever made anything have all gone through this kind of thing in one way, shape or form.
Failure way to greatness, as they say.
You just got to be resilient.
Yeah.
Right? You can read a book on resilience. Being resilient means you don't need to read the book, right? You just get on with it. You accept it.
You've got to learn it.
Like lots of entrepreneurs, I get hammered, absolutely by something catastrophic.
Yeah.
And 48 hours later, you're back on the horse again.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Shed your tears, feel sorry for yourself for a little bit, but then get back as soon as you can. Don't stay there.
Because going back to Charlie Munger's advice, no self-pity, like no one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares. People be sympathetic because they're humans, but they can't do anything about it.
No.
And no one, unfortunately, is inspired by people who've got negativity coming out left, right, and centre.
No, exactly.
Right? So you've got to kind of sweep all that under the carpet and get back on it.
Yeah, which is exactly what you've done, and that's fantastic. So, last few questions for you, James, if you don't mind.
Of course.
You've already given shared some advice that you've received, but is there any final piece of advice that you've received that has really helped you over the years?
So, final piece of advice, which is something I've really tried to take on board in the last couple of years. Right, when your back's up against the wall and you need to focus, right, you've got to massively reduce your inputs. Right, that means no social media, no poring over the news. No conversations with people who aren't adding to your business, and you've got to focus, right? And I've started to kind of be able to do that now. A horrible one for, spending 6 hours reading about geopolitical news. That has to go. You've got to reduce your inputs and you've got to focus, right? And compartmentalize your day, right? You're going to worry about X and X between these hours and these hours. You're going to do family time between here and here. You're going to the gym between here and here. Eat well, get some sleep, break your day into small pieces. Right. And if you want to focus, just reduce the amount of unnecessary information that clogs up your head. That's the best piece of advice.
Yeah.
Because if you follow that, you'll actually get stuff done.
Yeah.
And then you'll suddenly find, as you're getting stuff done, your problems are now starting to reduce.
Yeah. And you get momentum, you get the positive vibe, you get the adrenaline rush, all of that good stuff.
You get all that. But it's really hard to do that in today's age. And everything is like bite-sized bits of information. It's kind of flooding the system.
Yeah.
But if you wake up at 4 a.m, like I do sometimes, and I've had 3 hours of, checking every possible news site, by the time I'm ready to sit down at 7 o'clock, I've already used up half my day's worth of thinking space.
Yeah.
Right. So get rid of all of that. That's the best bit of discipline I've learned recently.
I think that's a really good, because there's a lot of noise, and it's a bit like, it's like you talked about, mentioned diet, rubbish in, rubbish out. It's the same with what goes into your brain, isn't it? And you have to be selective. You need to know what's going on in the world, but if you start catastrophizing about all of the terrible things that are going on, then it's just going to completely mess with your head.
Well, this is it. Brain's going to do so much processing. It wants. So don't process stuff that isn't going to move the needle and get you to where you want to be. Because if you can actually knuckle down, focus, get the work out the door, then the results start to happen, and all the things you were worrying about, seem to disappear amazingly.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny actually, because I often say to my husband Chris at the end of the day, he'll say, "Oh, it might be a simple question. Oh, what would you like for dinner?" And I'll go, "I can't make any more decisions today. I have a quota. I'm done. My brain is about to fry. Please, whatever, just food is good." You know what I mean? And I think it's the same kind of, there's only so much space. And if you're filling it with rubbish, then you can't, you haven't got space for the good stuff.
You're absolutely right. And there's a couple of things that are worth investing in, and what you eat, and how much sleep you get.
Yeah.
Really important.
Yeah.
Arguably the most important things.
Yeah.
So make sure you eat well. I've got down to the art of batch cooking on Sunday now. I'll spend my 5 hours trying to get as close to a Michelin recipe as I can, and then I don't have to think about that in the evening. But I know I'm getting the right level of nutrition, and I'm trying to get the sleep in, because I think lots of entrepreneurs, and have all done it. You wake up at 3 a.m, cortisol kicks in, you start running the algorithms. That is not good.
No.
You will not help yourself long term if you can't sleep.
Yeah. No, it's simple stuff, but it's so often the stuff that people don't pay attention to. They don't respect their bodies. They don't respect these things.
Go to the gym. You don't have to go to the gym, but it helps.
Do something.
Be active. That really does help. Eat well. Be active. Give a lot of love to your family and stuff. Don't take everything so bloody seriously. Focus when you have to.
Yeah.
Just keep moving the needle.
Yeah. No, that's great. And if you were to describe this year in one word, James, what would that word be and why?
Yeah, so I'm optimistic this year. I'm optimistic this year because, why the hell not? And again, going back to look at what's happening, there's always something in the world happening which shouldn't be happening. Right? It's really easy to get caught up in it, but I'm really optimistic. I think despite, the economic conditions, what could be said as a complete lack of support for entrepreneurs through policy, I'm really optimistic really, really optimistic. I think we've had a lot of downside. If you look at the last 10 years, quite a lot of that's been downside. That pendulum's got to swing back.
Yeah.
Why not 2026?
Why not? This is our year.
Absolutely.
It's all happening. So, James, music is a big emotional kind of, thing for all of us. It brings memories back.
Everyone's trying to say something cool now. It's like, right, say something that's like not too obvious, but quite cool, that kind of reflects.
Don't overthink it. Favourite song and artist?
Favourite song? I don't know. I mean, I'm terrible. I don't have a favourite song and artist.
Just pick a good one.
Do you know what I've been listening to recently?
Go for it.
And I've been sort of like dancing with the children in the kitchen, like Vanilla Ice. And it sort of like reminds me of like when I was a kid, and it's like, God, everything was so bloody simple then. But I don't know, since I've had children, I used to have I used to DJ a little bit. I used to have an encyclopedic knowledge of dance music. Since I had children, it's just like that went. Like, I stopped listening to music, stopped watching movies, stopped doing all that stuff. So if I hear a song that I like, I end up listening to it about 50 times on repeat. But anyway, that was my, not quite so cool. I can't think of anything better to
Vanilla Ice, baby.
Definitely.
Yes.
I mean, the shaved eyebrow, the kind of hair.
We've not had that one, James.
The kind of, the big trousers that come out, the dancing.
I knew you'd deliver the goods. Classic. Excellent. So, James, when you hear brave, bold, brilliant, what does that mean to you?
Well, do you know what, actually? Interesting. It just reminds me of you. It's your brand and you absolutely embody all of these things. And I thought that the first time you gave me the business card with it, I will never look at those 3 words without thinking, about you. And, more credit to you for, taking ownership of that. I think it's an amazing thing that you're doing.
Oh, thank you, James. What a lovely way to end. Thank
Almost
you so much. It's a wrap.
Well, thank you so much.
We're done.